Good morning. My name is Jean Daniel, and I'm a pastor in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Currently serve as associate priest at Christ Church Cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral in downtown Montreal. And I'm also a researcher and PhD candidate who focuses on children's ministry. And on Good Friday, traditionally at my parish, we have a Stations of the Cross that we do for children, where we go through the journey that Jesus had on Good Friday. And in this time of social distancing, I was trying to think of how to best share that with children. And it occurred to me that I didn't want to make a video for kids. I wanted to make a video for parents. One of the reasons for that is talking about delicate things to children of varying age and varying abilities to understand and emotionally process is exceedingly difficult. St. Fred Rogers is probably one of the best at doing it, and even Fred Rogers openly would have said that he was focusing on a very specific age group. And those of us who work in churches or even just have multiple children in our own families find that we have children at different developmental stages and emotional preparation, and teaching hard stories, talking about death and violence to a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old at the same time is always messy. It's something that I have tried to hone over the years in how we do at my own parish, but when I'm in the room with the kids, I'm comfortable doing it. In most cases, it's children I know fairly well. In our parish, when we do the Children's Stations of the Cross, their parents or grandparents are with them, so I have support from people who know and love them, and I can see them. So if something is causing them confusion or pain, I'm right there with them. And so that's one reason why I've decided to share some feelings about how do we discuss Good Friday with our kids as a video for our parents. Because I couldn't make a video that would do this well for all ages, for all of your children. And I think that's one of the main points. That no matter how hard I tried, I wouldn't be satisfied with what came out, because it's difficult, but it's important. So the first principle I wanted to share about Good Friday and children, I think, is kind of that visceral question of, well, why would you even tell children such a horrific story? And there are a few reasons for it. One is Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." Let the children experience Jesus Christ. And the Christian journey is frequently described in the Bible as following Jesus and walking beside Jesus and allowing Jesus to walk beside us. And in harsher language, sometimes Paul even talks about taking upon a cross. And following Jesus means, admittedly, at our own developmental and emotional level, but nonetheless it means following Jesus through his whole journey. He was a baby who was born. He was an adolescent who seemingly rebelled a little bit against his mother, shockingly. He was a young adult who had friends and disappointments, and he was a mortal human who died. And that's the reality. So to invite anyone of any age to journey with Jesus requires a certain amount of honesty. Beyond the idea of being on the journey with Jesus, I think one reason why parents, and I'm a parent of 2 children, are hesitant to talk about difficult things is we want to protect our children. And I think it's really important to understand, whether we're talking in terms of church or wider life, the world has sickness, the world has death, the world has violence, the world has injustice, and we don't protect our kids by pretending it doesn't. We don't protect our children from pain and grief by acting like there's nothing in this world to be sad about. And that's the difficult part, because we could recklessly overexpose them to too much too fast. But it's also wrong to not teach them. I know that I often am asked, whether we're talking about the pain and suffering and even violence of Good Friday, or with older kids, if we're talking about human sexuality and ethics in a youth group, people sometimes say, well, I don't want my kids to hear about violence or sex or injustice at church. To which I would say, then where? Because it's going to happen. They are going to learn. So it's really important that we guide the learning, that we be there for them, that we support them in the learning. And that's kind of principle one that we have to teach kids about the hard things of life. So, number two, why on Good Friday? Or why teach the Good Friday story in particular? One of the best ways to teach moral principles in a way that allows each person listening to engage at the level they are intellectually or emotionally is through storytelling. And I don't simply mean religious stories. There's a reason why so much children's literature involves the death of dogs. There's a reason why, even if we can argue about how well it's presented in any given Disney film, so many fairy tales and Disney movies are contingent upon a loved one dying. Stories are a way that we can recognize something is real and part of real experience with the relative safety of it not being part of our experience yet. It's devastating for a child to learn these things if it's not done delicately, but it needs to be done. And stories, including our religious stories, are one way that we can teach these principles, including the hard ones. That sometimes governments are unjust, sometimes violence occurs, and that death is real. So point 3, how do we tell the story of Jesus' crucifixion in a way that is safe and appropriate? Well, we tell the truth. I want to be clear about what I mean about telling the truth. Whether you talk to a psychologist about how you talk to children about death or sex or any of these things that are hard, it's really emphatically agreed upon by most specialists that we tell the truth. That we tell the truth, however, in the simplest and most direct language possible. That we avoid euphemisms as much as they might help our own comfort. That we avoid saying that Jesus passed on or went home, but we say Jesus died. We use that language, it's clear. But in being honest, we don't have to be graphic. We don't have to be excessive. So, be honest. Jesus was a man who, in our Christian tradition, we love and follow. And he taught things that help us know how to live our lives now. And we love his example and we're grateful for all the things he did. Unfortunately, we live in a world where not everybody appreciates people teaching these kinds of things. He taught people to share. He taught people to give up being wealthy to help the poor. He taught people to love those who they were taught to hate. He taught people to love people from other countries, other cultures. He spent time with people who weren't popular. And in doing so, some people didn't love him the way that we try to love him. And he, on Good Friday, was arrested the night before, had a very unfair trial, and the government killed him. That is a hard story. And when we share hard stories, it's also important that we understand one of the emotional concerns our children will have is, am I safe? Are you safe? And we should emphasize, insofar as we are safe, what is different, how we are safer, that we might live in a country with freedom of speech, which is a very big deal and a very happy and reassuring thing. But I don't want us to reassure in a way that pretends that bad things don't happen, because especially with older elementary school kids, grade 5, grade 6, into middle school, they know governments are unjust. They know about police brutality and people dying who don't deserve to die. And telling this story is about recognizing not just the way the ancient world was different, but the ways that we're not different, and that injustice and violence still exist. So if you can tell the story in the simplest terms with the least euphemism, it gives you an opportunity to have the honest conversations. So a principle beyond telling the truth is tell the truth at the level that the children with whom you are discussing it are ready for. But how do you know that level? There are numerous charts about what age children are ready for which things, and it certainly is a good starting point. But if you are in a one-on-one or one-on-two conversation just with your own children, the easiest way to know, because those charts are generalizations at best, is what are their follow-up questions. So you tell the story very simply, and they will lead the conversation. They will lead with what they wonder. Most literature about talking about death with children emphasizes that we be very realistic about the finality of it. That we don't say somebody died in a way that gives them the expectation that they're going to see them tomorrow. This is complicated for those of us with Orthodox Christian beliefs that Jesus died and was dead and rose on the third day, which I literally believe. Not surprising given my outfit. So how do we handle that nuance? I think it's okay to emphasize that Jesus really died. It's good theology in Christian tradition. He didn't pretend to die. We can give the hope of Easter, and on Easter we can talk about what we believe by resurrection. Now, one way that I emphasize with my children, whether I'm talking about my own children or the children I teach at church, is that for me the Easter story is about the possibility that God can resurrect. But I'm also very blunt that resurrecting somebody 3 days later, that's a story I believe about Easter. It's something that happened once that gives me hope that it can happen again. And that helps me balance teaching the finality of death, especially for those around us who die. Perhaps you're wondering, if you share these stories with your children, will they be scared? Will they be uncomfortable? And the answer is probably. Yet, we have to talk to our kids about the scary things. And Jesus tells us to bring children on the journey with him, which means at a developmentally appropriate level, we teach them the full reality that the world is unjust, but we can advocate for justice. That there is violence, but we can be people of peace. That there is death, and we can be a people who await resurrection. It's challenging, it's imperfect, and as you find ways to commemorate Good Friday and celebrate Easter in your families, I'm praying with and for you. And I look forward, for those of you in Montreal, to teaching the happy, joyous, wonderful, good news, and occasionally harder, sadder news with your children and your families as soon as we can be back together. Thank you.